Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, the place to come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker, and welcome to episode 281, When Growth Creates Distance, Navigating Relationships as You Evolve. Well, welcome back to this month as we are gently getting real with ourselves about where we are in our personal growth and where we are in our relationships. Today, we're going to dive into, I think, one of the hardest but least talked about side effects of personal growth, outgrowing relationships. We're going to explore why this happens and how to navigate the discomfort and what to do when you realize that some people in your life may not be able to grow with you. Before we get into all of that, I want to also remind you that if you need more help around just getting healthier, and you want a solution-focused, positive approach on becoming more badass at your life, make sure you sign up for a power hour with me soon. Those slots are going quick, and the link is right there in the show notes. If you have any questions, just reach out on social. I answer every message. Okay, so let's get into it, shall we? You know, growth is a beautiful thing, and I wouldn't do this work if I didn't truly believe that. But what happens when your personal growth starts to create distance between you and the people in your life? When you begin to heal, when you begin to build confidence and establish healthier patterns, the math is a math. I mean, you start to require, you need, it's not a want, it's a need, a different kind of energy around you. You might notice that some relationships just no longer feel fulfilling. More obvious is that the old dynamics feel draining, or that certain people react negatively to the changes that you're making, even though they're good changes. So let's talk about the side effect of growth that no one talks about. And I joke with clients that I don't throw this out there in the beginning of their work because it might keep them from doing their work. You know how I talk here on the show all the time about I just don't think that we're going to let go of a relationship, no matter how unhealthy or toxic, unless we have better things and better people to grab onto. Well, if I brought up this truth that, you might start outgrowing some of the unhealthier people in your life that may be too terrifying to a person just beginning the work. They can't even grab onto themselves yet in order to let go, and we won't do vacuums. So personal growth changes the way you see yourself and others. And that's the other thing that you don't know until you get there. Like, people can talk about it, but you don't know until you get there. Because when you commit to personal growth, I think everything starts to shift, not just within you, but in the way you relate to the world around you as well. You're becoming more self-aware, more emotionally grounded, and hopefully more intentional with your choices. Well, guys, this naturally changes how you see yourself, how you see your relationships, and the bar just gets raised organically. It changes what you're willing to tolerate. And at first, you might not even notice it's happening. You're focused on healing, setting boundaries, and becoming a more confident version of yourself. But over time, you start to realize that certain relationships, ones that once felt comfortable or even essential, just no longer feel the same. What's happening is you start to crave healthier relationships, deeper conversations, and mutual respect. And those relationships that may have once felt fulfilling may now start to feel a bit shallow, maybe draining, maybe one-sided. Maybe you realize a lot of your relationships are with people you gave, and they were a little self-centered or always in so much pain that there wasn't room for you. Maybe you no longer have the emotional bandwidth for things like negativity, gossip, or, just surface level connections. You find yourself instead drawn to people who take responsibility for their emotions, who respect boundaries, and they value personal growth too, because that's what you're doing now. This shift isn't about thinking you're better than anyone. It's really just about alignment. You're naturally gravitating towards relationships, I think, that match your new level of emotional health, your new level of self-respect, and your clarity. And that means some connections will sadly no longer fit. Now, a piece of reality around this is that this shift can often create tension, confusion, and even grief. Outgrowing people isn't just a mental shift, it's an emotional one, and it can be deeply unsettling. Tension arises because people sense the change in you even if they can't put their finger on it, like even if you've never revealed to them the therapeutic work you've been doing. You might start to hear comments like, you've changed, or you're really acting different, or what's going on with you? And then confusion sets in for you because you still care about these people. But the dynamic just doesn't feel right anymore. And then, of course, grief surfaces as you realize that some relationships won't be able to evolve with you. Letting go of old patterns means letting go of the people who are still in them. And that is something that is true and can be hard to swallow. One of the hardest parts of growth, I think, is accepting that not everyone is going to come along for the journey. And while that is so painful, it's also a sign that you're stepping into a more authentic version of yourself, one that refuses to shrink just to keep others comfortable. Alana Van Zant has a saying. She says you're running alongside someone and they just sit down. They stop growing. They're just sitting down. They've stopped. She said, don't turn around and go back and try to yank them off the curb. Don't try to cajole or shame them or beg or plead. Don't sit your butt down next to them either. She said, get back up and start running again. If and when they're ready, they'll catch up. What are some of the signs you are outgrowing certain relationships? Well, one of the big things is that you feel more drained than renewed after spending time with them. So instead of leaving your interactions feeling uplifted or connected, you walk away feeling exhausted, frustrated, or even resentful. The dynamic might feel one-sided, like you're always listening, offering support, or being the emotional dumping ground, but you rarely receive the same in return. These conversations might revolve around the same complaints, negativity, or victimhood, and you realize you're just no longer interested in carrying out these emotional burdens. And maybe you notice that spending time with them feels more like an obligation rather than something that you actually want to do. Conversations start feeling stagnant or frustrating, and you feel like you just no longer connect. Like what once felt like effortless conversation now feels forced or repetitive or surface level. Like you try to talk about your growth, maybe your new interests, or even your insights, but they don't know what to do with them. So they dismiss them, change the subject, or just don't seem interested. The other thing that can happen is the dynamic might feel stuck in old versions of who you used to be rather than who you're becoming. Because they're used to the old version of you. They haven't caught up with a new one yet. Because they might have to change in order to do that. Maybe you catch yourself holding back from sharing things that matter to you because you don't feel seen, heard, or understood. Another thing that can happen is there's actually judgment, resistance, or some passive-aggressive comments about your changes. And it's more common than you think. So instead of being supportive, they make subtle or maybe not so subtle digs at your growth. Oh, so now you're too good for us? Or Must be nice to have all this time for self-care. They might roll their eyes, downplay your progress, or act as if your new habits or boundaries are unnecessary. And that can be done in even more insidious ways that we don't have time to get into today, but just know that that can happen. And you can see the lack of emotional maturity on their part if they're doing these things. The other big one that can happen a lot is if you're setting healthier boundaries, they might frame it as rejection or accuse you of being selfish for prioritizing yourself. Their reactions reveal discomfort, right? Your growth is highlighting something in them that they may not be ready to face. Maybe they're not ready for self-care or to have healthy boundaries or to look for better things for their life. And speaking of that, you've shifted from a victim mindset to a more empowered one, and maybe they haven't. For example, you're actively working on taking responsibility for your emotions and your choices and your actions, while they continue to blame others for their circumstances. Well, that's going to be a really uncomfortable conversation if they want to call you up and just bitch and moan about so-and-so for the 15th time. Because you start to notice that conversations are centered on complaining rather than solutions. And so any attempts to offer new perspectives are going to be met with defensiveness. They're not ready to hear that yet. You are, but they're not. And then while you're becoming more focused on healing and growing and taking action, they seem stuck in cycles of inaction and victim stance and excuses or just avoidance because they're terrified. So it starts to become clear that your mindsets are like moving in completely different directions. And so that's why maintaining the connection starts to feel increasingly difficult. So outgrowing relationships isn't just about changing interests or lifestyles. It's about an internal transformation. As we heal, we evolve, and we build healthier habits. The way we engage with the world shifts in very profound ways. Here's what's really happening beneath the surface when we start to feel that distance. The first one is you are becoming more self-aware. You're no longer ignoring red flags or making excuses for toxic behaviors. You start seeing patterns for what they really are, rather than explaining them away or hoping they'll change with time, like we talked about earlier this month. Instead of justifying someone's hurtful actions with, well, they didn't mean it, or they're just going through a hard time, you acknowledge that consistent behavior, not the occasional apologies, is what truly defines a person. You're recognizing unhealthy patterns, both within yourself and in other people. And the other big thing is that you're moving from those autopilot reactions to hopefully intentional choices in your relationships. So instead of reacting out of habit or past conditioning, you start to pause and reflect and choose responses that align with your new values and your boundaries. You're no longer just going along with the flow to keep the peace either. And that's a process that you get better and better at, but you can't become unaware of this, right? So you're actively deciding on what kind of relationships you want to nurture and which ones no longer serve you. The second thing that's happening is your bandwidth for BS just gets smaller, is what I call it. Your tolerance for dysfunction is decreasing. So again, what once felt normal, like the complaining, the gossiping, the emotional unavailability, the immature behavior, the lack of accountability, now feels exhausting. You no longer feel obligated to fix or rescue or overextend yourself anymore to make relationships work. Instead, you start craving mutual effort and respect, and that lovely word, reciprocity, instead of the one-sided emotional labor. You're not the only one to become aware of things anymore and bring things up to fix them. Third thing is you're shifting from a victim mindset to an empowered one. Old dynamics were built on who you used to be, whether that was the peacekeeper, the fixer, the victim, the compliant one, or the one who made excuses for others. Because as you step into empowerment, you take responsibility for your choices and your emotions and your growth. But if the people around you haven't made that same shift, they're going to be resistant to your newfound clarity. They're not going to like it. They're going to be afraid of it. Deep down people know, and they can feel it intuitively when we start to shift. They also know deep down that if they don't change, they're going to lose you. And change is loss, and loss is scary. And they're not ready. Fourth thing is you're setting boundaries that weren't there before. You're changing the game. You're learning to say no. No to unhealthy conversations. No to unhealthy expectations or obligations. Maybe you're no longer emotionally available 24/7 to absorb others' negativity. And guess what? The people who once benefited from your lack of boundaries may not like this change, especially if you are with people who trend towards the narcissistic side. They're not going to like it at all because they're no longer the center of your orbit, and you're not going to say yes to everything they want. The fifth thing is you are focused on growth. And sadly, others might be comfortable just staying the same. They're not ready yet. And you're seeking out new ideas, new experiences, and you're on this quest for deeper understanding, especially of yourself. And so your conversations are shifting from that surface level venting to hopefully some deeper solution focused dialogue. But if someone isn't on a growth path themselves, your transformation, again, can feel very uncomfortable to them. So what happens is you start to notice the gaps, that the differences in mindset and energy, the differences in emotional responsibility and maturity. And guys, it's not that you suddenly don't care about these people. I have clients bring that up a lot. It's that you're realizing you no longer fit in the same way. And that can be a painful but necessary wake-up call. So what do we do with this? Well, the big emotional challenge, I think, is grieving what could have been. Let's admit, you really hoped, or you are hoping, that they will grow with you. But right now, they aren't choosing to. They may never, or they may start tomorrow. We have no control over that. You can feel guilt for stepping away from old friendships and even family. Because again, if they haven't done anything horrific in the last 24 hours, you may question whether it's okay for you to move on. And you wrestle with detachment, how do you let go without feeling like you're abandoning them? And so how do you navigate these changes without what I think a lot of is unearned guilt? Well, first, stop trying to convince them to change. Try to let them be where they are and bring it back to yourself and realize and take responsibility for the grieving that you have to do. And try to detach with love. Not everything needs to end dramatically, right? Maybe you just step away a little bit. Maybe you love them more from afar. Maybe you just don't hang out as much. And if you stay connected, try to be the healthier model, but don't compromise your growth. And that can be tricky, and you need support around that. And try to really let go of control, because it is not your job to manage their fears or reactions. You have to grieve that too. Just put it on the list, right? Great, here's another thing I have to grieve, Mary. And then when you have to get together, around holidays, if this is family or whatever, instead of forcing connection, just observe dynamics with curiosity. Just kind of step back a little bit. Maybe shift your approach to less reacting, more listening. And then just try to find some simple non-reactive responses, right? So you can avoid getting pulled into old dynamics. You go do the dishes, you step outside for a walk, you go to the loo, you do whatever you need to do. Growth changes your standards. It changes your perspective. And I think it changes your worldview. And the kind of relationships that feel aligned with who you're becoming are the ones that you're going to need and want. Outgrowing people isn't about superiority at all. I think it's about self-respect. And I think it's about reality. That when we grow, we outgrow. Just like we outgrew clothes as a kid, we outgrow people and relationships when we start to heal and shift our whole mindset to personal responsibility. But the challenge isn't just about navigating these shifts. It's about trusting yourself enough to let go of what no longer serves you. And so before we end today, I want to stop and say, it's okay if this is scary. It's okay if you hang on until you're ready to let go. You probably won't let go until you have a couple people, like I talked about in the beginning of the episode, that are healthier or where you want to be, and you can grab onto them. It's okay. What I want to encourage you to do is just allow the process to happen. And today, just hopefully normalize some things for you. And if it hasn't happened yet, when it starts to happen for you, you're like, oh, okay, that's what this is. I'm not a terrible person. I'm just outgrowing. That's why this feels uncomfortable. And know that the more toxic the person, the harder this is going to be. And make sure, again, that you're not doing this work alone. Get a coach, get a therapist, and a support group who can help you through that. Because a lot of times people can just get abused again when they start to step away. So today we talked about how growth isn't just about changing yourself. It's about changing the way you engage with the world around you. Like everything starts to change. And as you evolve, it's natural to find that some relationships just no longer align with where you're headed. This isn't a sign that something is wrong. It's proof that you're making real progress. And while it might be very difficult to navigate the tension, the grief, and lovely resistance from other people, staying true to your growth is the most important commitment you can make to yourself. And so the challenge isn't just in recognizing these shifts. It's about learning how to handle them with as much clarity and self-respect and grace as you can gather. And as you move forward, I want you to remember that you don't ever have to justify your growth. You don't ever need to, or nor do you have the power to convince others to change. But you never have to shrink yourself to fit back in the old dynamics either. The relationships that are meant to grow with you will, and those that don't may serve as reminders of how far you've come. Either way, trust yourself and the path you're on. Thank you for hanging out with me today. If you want to work through this with more guidance and support, check out my Find Your Voice program, because we break it down how to set boundaries, how to grab some healthy people to hang on to. And when you stop carrying what is yours, you get to show up as your lovely, authentic self. So the link is right there in the show notes. And just remember, if you need more in-depth work on facing things, sign up for a power hour with me and we can figure that out. Okay, so pay it forward, keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.